The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday, crisp and formal against the usual junk mail. It was from my estranged Aunt Clara, a woman I hadn't seen since I was a child, requesting my presence at the reading of her will. The location was her ancestral home, a sprawling, Gothic affair nestled deep in the woods outside of town, a place locals whispered about, a place I'd only ever seen in faded photographs. Despite the years of silence and the unsettling reputation of the house, curiosity, and perhaps a touch of morbid fascination, compelled me to accept. Now, a week later, I found myself standing on the creaking porch, the air thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. The house loomed before me, its darkened windows like vacant eyes staring out from beneath heavy, moss-covered eaves. The lawyer, a Mr. Abernathy, a man whose demeanor suggested he'd seen more than his fair share of family dramas, greeted me at the door. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of old wood and dust. The furniture was draped in white sheets, giving the rooms an eerie, spectral quality. The other attendees were a motley crew, distant cousins I barely recognized, their faces etched with a mixture of apprehension and avarice. The reading of the will was brief and anticlimactic. Most of the estate was to be sold off, the proceeds divided amongst the distant relatives. However, there was a peculiar clause. Aunt Clara had bequeathed one specific item to me, the contents of the locked room in the basement. A shiver traced its way down my spine. The basement. Even the word held a certain ominous weight. Mr. Abernathy produced an antique iron key, its surface cold and smooth against my palm. "Your aunt was insistent that you be the one to open it," he said, his voice carefully neutral, yet I detected a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. The other relatives exchanged uneasy glances. Whispers rippled through the room. "The basement?" Cousin Mildred muttered, her face pale. "There are stories." Ignoring their hushed tones, a strange compulsion drew me towards the basement door. It was tucked away in a dark corner of the hallway, a heavy, unadorned slab of wood that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. The iron hinges were thick with rust. Taking a deep breath, I inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a groan that echoed through the silent house. The door swung inward, revealing a narrow, steep staircase descending into absolute darkness. The same gust of damp, earthy air I'd experienced earlier wafted out, carrying that unsettling metallic tang. Armed with the flashlight Mr. Abernathy had provided, a heavy, old-fashioned model that felt strangely inadequate, I began my descent. Each step was a precarious negotiation with the creaking wood, the sound amplified in the oppressive silence. The air grew colder, the earthy smell intensifying, mingling now with a faint sweetness that was somehow more disturbing than the mildew. Dust motes swirled in the beam of my flashlight, creating an illusion of movement in the periphery. The shadows danced and stretched, transforming the mundane into the monstrous. Discarded shapes began to emerge, forgotten relics of a life lived within these walls. A rocking chair draped in a sheet looked like a hunched figure waiting in the darkness. A stack of old books became a looming, unstable tower. The dripping started soon after I reached the bottom, a slow, rhythmic plink that punctuated the silence like a morbid metronome. It seemed to emanate from the far corner of the basement, a constant reminder of the dampness and decay. My flashlight beam swept across the room, revealing the rough, uneven concrete walls, stained in places with dark, unidentifiable marks. Cobwebs, thick and sticky, hung like grotesque tapestries, brushing against my face and hair. The air was heavy, pressing down on me, making it difficult to breathe. Then I saw the shelves, rows and rows of them lining one entire wall, and on the shelves, jars, hundreds of them, filled with murky, discolored liquids. Inside some, I could make out indistinct shapes, things preserved in formaldehyde, their forms grotesque and unsettling. My stomach lurched. What had Aunt Clara been collecting down here? A faint scratching sound broke the oppressive silence. It seemed to be coming from behind a large stack of wooden crates in the darkest corner of the basement. It was a dry, insistent sound, like something small and frantic trying to claw its way out. My breath hitched. "Hello." I called out, my voice a weak, unsteady whisper in the vast, echoing space. The dripping continued its relentless rhythm. The scratching persisted, a tiny, desperate plea in the silence. I moved slowly towards the sound, my flashlight beam fixed on the stack of crates. They were old and worn, the wood splintered and faded. As I drew closer, the scratching stopped abruptly. A moment of absolute silence descended, heavier and more unnerving than before. Then it started again, closer this time, seemingly just on the other side of the crates. My heart pounded in my chest. I could feel the pulse throbbing in my ears. I rounded the stack of crates, my flashlight beam wavering. Nothing. Just the dusty wood, the rough concrete wall behind it. But then I noticed it, a dark stain spreading across the concrete floor, originating from beneath the crates. It looked wet, almost viscous, and the metallic scent in the air was stronger here, acrid and sharp. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the top of the stairs, making me jump. I whirled around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the shadowy space. The basement door, which I had left slightly ajar, was now firmly closed. A wave of panic washed over me, cold and suffocating. I was trapped. Cut off from the world above, the scratching started again, this time seemingly right behind me. I could feel the faint vibrations through the soles of my shoes. I didn't dare to turn around. The air grew heavy, pressing down on me, thick with the metallic smell and something else now, a cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. A cold draft snaked around my ankles, raising goosebumps on my arms, and then a soft whisper, so close it felt like a breath on the back of my neck. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was chillingly playful, laced with a hint of something ancient and malevolent. My grip on the flashlight loosened. It slipped from my trembling fingers and clattered onto the cold concrete floor, plunging me into absolute, disorienting darkness. The scratching intensified, a frantic, desperate clawing. The whispering grew louder, swirling around me, a chorus of unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Something cold and bony brushed against my hand. A scream built in my chest, but it was trapped, unable to escape my paralyzed throat. My breath came in ragged gasps. I squeezed my eyes shut, every nerve ending in my body screaming in terror. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The scratching, the whispering, the cold, the oppressive weight in the air. Silence. A profound, echoing silence that was almost as terrifying as the cacophony that had preceded it. Slowly, hesitantly, I opened my eyes, straining to see in the impenetrable darkness. After what felt like an eternity, I fumbled blindly on the floor, my hands shaking uncontrollably, until my fingers closed around the cold metal of the flashlight. The beam flickered to life, casting a weak, wavering circle of light. I swept the beam around the basement. The stain on the floor was still there. The dusty crates. The rows of jars filled with their grotesque contents. The cobwebs hung like shrouds. Everything was exactly as it had been before the descent into darkness, except for the feeling, the lingering, visceral sense of violation, the icy dread that clung to me like a second skin, the unshakable certainty that I was no longer alone. I didn't wait. I scrambled towards the stairs, my movements clumsy and desperate. I didn't look back at the corner where the scratching had come from. I didn't examine the dark stain on the floor. I didn't try to decipher the whispers that still seemed to echo in the silence of my mind. I stumbled up the creaking stairs, my lungs burning, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I didn't stop until I burst through the basement door and into the relative warmth and light of the hallway, gasping for breath. Mr. Abernathy and my cousins were still there, their faces etched with concern. "Are you all right?" Mr. Abernathy asked, his voice laced with a hint of something I couldn't quite decipher. I couldn't speak. I could only shake my head, my eyes darting towards the closed basement door, as if expecting something to emerge from the darkness. "What did you find down there?" Cousin Mildred asked, her voice trembling slightly. I swallowed hard, trying to dislodge the knot of fear in my throat. "Nothing," I managed to croak out, the lie feeling heavy and inadequate. "Just dust." But even as I spoke the words, I knew they were false. I knew that something had happened down there, something I couldn't explain, something that had touched me with a cold, unseen hand. The rest of the day passed in a blur. The house felt different now, tainted by the darkness of the basement. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence more oppressive. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something unseen was lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. Mr. Abernathy finalized the paperwork, and one by one, my relatives departed, eager to leave the unsettling atmosphere of the old house behind. As I stood on the porch, ready to leave myself, Mr. Abernathy approached me. "Miss," he said, his voice low, "your aunt, she was a peculiar woman. She had her eccentricities." I nodded, unable to find my voice. He hesitated for a moment, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. "She left this for you as well," she said. "It would protect you." The locket felt cold in my hand. It was intricately carved with strange symbols I didn't recognize. A wave of unease washed over me. Protect me from what? I thanked him, my voice barely a whisper. As I drove away from the house, the Gothic silhouette receding in my rearview mirror, I clutched the locket tightly. The image of the dark stain on the basement floor, the frantic scratching, the chilling whispers, they were all etched into my memory, a terrifying secret I now carried with me. Back home, the familiar comfort of my apartment felt alien. The memory of the basement clung to me, a persistent shadow in the corners of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, something unseen and malevolent. Days turned into weeks. I tried to push the experience to the back of my mind, to rationalize it as a trick of the darkness, an overactive imagination fueled by the house's unsettling atmosphere. But the memory of the cold touch on my hand, the chilling whispers in the dark, they were too real, too visceral to dismiss. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself staring at the silver locket. On a whim, I opened it. Inside, nestled against a faded velvet lining, was a tiny dried flower. It was a type I didn't recognize, its petals a deep, unsettling shade of purple. As I touched the flower, a jolt like a static shock ran through my fingers. Suddenly, images flooded my mind, fleeting glimpses of shadows moving in the periphery, the faint scent of mildew and metal, the chilling sound of dry, insistent scratching. Terror gripped me. The locket wasn't protection. It was a connection. A link to whatever resided in the darkness of that basement. I tried to get rid of the locket, but every time I did, it reappeared, lying on my bedside table as if it had always been there. I was trapped, bound to the memory of that terrifying experience. One evening, as dusk began to settle, I heard it again. A faint, dry, scratching sound coming from beneath the floorboards of my apartment. It was the same sound I had heard in the basement. Panic seized me. It had followed me. Whatever it was here. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand, my hand shaking so violently the beam danced erratically across the walls. The scratching grew louder, closer. It seemed to be coming from the corner of my bedroom. Slowly, hesitantly, I moved towards the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. The air in the room grew cold, and the faint metallic scent I remembered from the basement filled my nostrils. I reached the corner and pointed the flashlight down. Nothing, just the dusty floorboards, but the scratching was still there, insistent and unnerving. Then I saw it, a small crack in the floorboards, barely noticeable, and from within the crack, a faint dark liquid was seeping out. It glistened in the beam of my flashlight, and the metallic scent was overpowering here. The scratching stopped. A soft whisper, chillingly familiar, seemed to brush against my ear. "You can't escape," it seemed to say. Terror overwhelmed me. I dropped the flashlight, plunging the room into darkness. The scratching started again, closer now, right beneath my feet. I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my slippers. Something cold and sharp scraped against my ankle. This time, I screamed. A long, drawn-out scream of pure, unadulterated terror that echoed through the silent apartment building. The scratching continued, relentless and insistent. The whispering grew louder, swirling around me in the darkness. I was no longer in my safe, familiar apartment. I was back in the basement, trapped in the darkness, with whatever lurked there. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that it would never let me go. The basement, and whatever resided within its shadowed depths, now had a hold on me, a terrifying, inescapable connection forged in the darkness and sealed by a cold, bony touch. The inheritance wasn't the house or its contents. It was something far more sinister, something that had been waiting patiently in the dark, and now it had finally found me. The scratching continued. A constant, chilling reminder of the terror that had taken root in my life, a terror that would never truly leave. The darkness had followed me home, and it was here to stay.